Business leaders know the future is already here. The economy is shifting. Non-humans are entering the workforce. Nothing feels certain. SHRM understands those evolving challenges, both in the workplace and the wider world. In this podcast, we'll bring together authors, researchers, executives, and non-traditional experts to help you take on the challenges others haven't yet considered. Because you don't need to be a futurist, you need actionable insights now. You need to be a Tomorrowist. I'm Jerry Wan. Welcome to Tomorrowist, where we explore the trends shaping the future of work. This week, we're asking, what happens when AI gets too personal? Digital assistants are becoming so advanced, they can feel like real companions, offering comfort, but also new risks for a workforce already grappling with loneliness. Here to help us unpack the psychological and organizational impacts of this trend is Dr. Julie Carpenter, a social scientist who studies how humans form social and emotional connections with AI. Julie, welcome to Tomorrowist.
Hi, thank you for inviting me on.
I'm excited to have this conversation. I think it's something that has been not only on many people's minds, but that we've read about. And then some news headlines that are deeply concerning with the impact of AI, friendships turning into something different. But we also have now, whether or not you agree with it or not, people relying on AI and chatbots to be their friend, be their therapist, be their sounding board. And so really excited to dive into this topic to understand sort of the psychology behind it and what business leaders can do as people will inevitably start using this more and more. And so let's start off the top. This feels like an interpersonal or a personal topic. Why should business leaders start paying attention to how the intersection of AI and loneliness manifests itself in the workplace?
That's a great question, but leaders should be paying attention to it because it could affect performance, retention, creativity, innovation. It could potentially increase isolation, collaboration on teams. But we don't know. But AI is also sitting at the intersection of now it's how people work, how they communicate, and we need to ensure that this technology strengthens teams and work and trust and doesn't erode it.
Tell me about, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but from your perspective, do you bifurcate or differentiate sort of the impact of AI as people use it for personal uses or for tools that organizations are building and encouraging their employees to use for internal LLMs or large language models or other things where AI can replace even internal human interfaces?
Right. So those are two very different contexts of use, right? So in one, somebody is opting in and using the LLM for something. They have a motivation or a goal. Whether they stray from that goal and decide to use other things is their own choice. Whether they decide that they enjoy the LLM, it's a creative output, it's useful for work at home, whatever it is. But it's their consent. And at work, that consent is often removed. They're told to use this as a tool. It's integrated into the workplace, and it often can have a slightly, if not very different interface. The LLM at work may be limited in the questions it can respond to be business oriented. So that, of course, changes the interactions, both short and long term. But it also creates a nuisance. People have new vulnerabilities at work where they want to bond and collaborate. That's part of teamwork. And we tend to treat the LLMs as something human-like. So even if it hasn't been integrated or presented in an anthropomorphized or human-like way, so even if the agent doesn't have a name, like if the agent was named Julie or Jerry, and even if it wasn't primed psychologically into the workforce as a new team member, people can still drift into that because it's presenting presence, really, and human-like conversational responses, what's called natural language. And we're trained as humans, if something speaks to us and seems to understand us and has an output that we can understand in language and writing, we're used to seeing that online and direct messages and everything else. We tend to treat it in a human-like way. So I guess what I'm saying is even at work, someone can slip into that context, though they're two very different use cases and possibly different models of LLMs with what they can and can't do. But the thing is that the idea of attachment to an AI lives within that person. So, and what I mean by that is the narrative that they create or the potential parasocial relationship is often not based on the limitations or capabilities of the LLM. So that means an LLM at work that maybe does have more limited capabilities and that it's supposed to be focused like on only work-oriented topics doesn't mean that somebody couldn't still fall into that
Right.
relationship mode, especially if they're over-relying on it in some way.
I want to ask this next question without the context of AI, and then we'll get into the context with AI. Tell us about what should business leaders be most aware of and perhaps concerned about the loneliness epidemic in general, and in particular the trends that we've seen. We've seen this topic be discussed plenty of times through the pandemic. Its impact on not only youth and students but adults as remote work became a thing, and then hybrid work has become a thing. We are living in a more polarized society, so conversations are not happening at the same level civically. What Tell us about your thoughts on the loneliness epidemic broadly, and then we'll go a little bit deeper into how AI plays a role in that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree that there's a loneliness epidemic so much as we are negotiating as cultures around the world, as societies, how to integrate new technologies and new ways of communicating into our lives. As you mentioned, the pandemic was a disruption. And the way we normally get together, the way we collaborate, the way we work, the way we meet people. So there has been a huge paradigm shift. And using AI can intensify or relieve loneliness. It can relieve loneliness maybe short term.
Hmm.
The thing is, it can simulate presence, but it doesn't provide real reciprocity. Again, it's not something that's human-like just because it can write something stylistically that appears to resonate with you emotionally because it happened to get a response rate that clicked with you doesn't mean it has the capability to really emotionally understand the person.
One of the other trends that have happened outside of or pre AI and pre pandemic was platforms like Slack and Teams and Discord as not only a acceptable but encouraged and sometimes mandatory ways of communicating, even in a professional context. Than if you're younger listening, you are more aware, or just if you're older, you had to learn how to communicate online. If you're younger, that's just the way that things were. Texting and Slack and Discord and things like that, where a faceless text interaction is becoming or has become the norm. Um, Previous to the mass adoption or introduction of AI, we were largely dealing or communicating with people on the other side that were human beings. Maybe we knew them, maybe we didn't. A lot of these platforms allow people to exist and to communicate without real transparency and identity. I think that's more of a Discord thing, but people should be familiar with that platform as well. And with the introduction of AI, we do not know. And so one thing that you mentioned earlier too, to put this into context, is customer service chatbots used to actually be human beings somewhere in the world writing and texting with you. Now, when you go to any old company and that pop-up comes up, 9 times out of 10, you're talking to a robot first. And so are we trained, or are we capable of discerning the two? And then how does that change how we, view those interactions?
Yes and no is going to be my answer. Yes, intellectually, something is presented to us as a chatbot, as an LLM, or as a bot, or as a robot, as you called it. Um, Intellectually, people can grasp the fact that it's not a person, right? Sometimes often what I see overlooked in marketing, and I would like to see rectified more in corporate training, is the distinction made of its limitations and how it should be used. Um, Often we see the capabilities touted, especially at this stage of use, where it can do almost anything. AI is sold to us as being almost magical. And so that, again, sort of leaves that creative possibility open for someone to use it. You mentioned during the pandemic when we were all we were in a very different situation. People were forced to use these tools to communicate with each other, things like Zoom. For some people, this was a way that they were used to communicating for work, for collaboration. Other people were not used to it. But again, the situation and the context of use were very different. People had to learn to use these tools rapidly in order to continue to succeed at work. Um, and people in general were terrified. We were in a pandemic situation, social isolation for many people, and or being more socially isolated than they were previously. So that was a more anxiety inducing probably situation, and certainly a very different communication situation where people can see each other. And as you said, there's a veracity to it. You can identify there's a human on the other end. The thing is with the LLMs and AI, as I mentioned earlier, we're negotiating, we're figuring out how to interact with LLMs. And I think, and other people in my field also think, that AI and how we use it is emerging as its own social category. And that's not crazy because as humans, we're great at developing social categories. So the way you may have heard the term code switching, the way you talk to a friend, or the way you talk to a person you just met, or the way you talk to a coworker, or the way you talk to your boss and interact with them are all different. So when I say AIs emerge as a social category, I'm not saying that all LLMs, all AI emerges as a social category, but some of them are emerging as different ones for good or for bad. So again, this largely depends on the context and the use case and the user as well. So I think what leaders have to remember, it's not just the tool. The ability and the use of the AI affect the attachment. And the attachment right now is being painted as something negative, but we don't know. There might be positive aspects to it as far as team building, collaboration, and trust down the road, because one of the social categories that may develop is that AI is a type of coworker. However, right now, the messaging that a lot of institutions and organizations are trying to give is that the AI supports the worker. And I think that there's sort of conflicting messages at some organizations that they have to be aware of, where they're presenting it as a flashy new tool that's sort of genius and will make your work completely different and potentially innovative. And that leaves open the possibility for over-reliance or misunderstanding the place that AI has in the workplace and the value of the human decision-making over the AI.
You wrote a book, a wonderful book called The Naked Android, and you talk about how human expectations of robots shape how they're designed and then how we interact with them, right? And that's evolving too, right? Because maybe we did not expect this video capability to be so good so soon. So broadly speaking, right, because AI has generally been, most of our interactions with AI, whether we know it or not, has been text-based. And I think it will be that, although the introduction of video will make things different for better or worse going forward. How can attachment to AI affect our team dynamics, culture in the workplace, and one-on-one relationships, particularly the ones between manager and employees?
So as AI in different forms becomes more integrated, let's say into the workplace, because we're focusing on that context and situation, I would say, first of all, leadership should define how AI is going to serve the people that of your organization, what it should and shouldn't do. And then technology should follow the culture, not the other way around. So make sure that the AI is supporting people in their decision making. And by that, I mean protect the human decision making, be clear where human judgment, empathy, and discretion are part of decision making, and they cannot rely and they should not rely on AI to make all their decisions. That's not something to be lauded or accepted. AI is a support tool, and make that clear. It also encouraging employees to be in the loop. Of course, it signals trust in them and their decision making, and it tells them still that they have a place and their work is valued. If it's a tool and one we're still beginning to understand how to use, and we're using it for such important decision making, then I think part of the process should be included in the dynamic when people are educating for AI use, that they should keep some record of accountability for the big
Mm.
decisions that they make based on AI. And also that they should design for disagreement with the AI. And that means, again, sometimes people will override it. They will disagree, even disagree heartily based on their experience. And again, leadership has to remember and support that the workers they hired have the real human experience and the human interaction experience with their teams and their collaborators. And leadership themselves has to be wary of over-reliance on the AI. And that has to, again, not just trickle down in modeling, but in the education for the users.
I want to share with you some stats that might seem curious at best. One stat I'll share: our own research here at SHRM shows that 90% of CHROs expect AI to play a bigger role in the future of work. And I just assume that last 10% doesn't listen to Tomorrowist, because I think everybody should at least be thinking about how this impacts, how it shows up in the workplace across all industries. Um, at the same time, and these are not conflicting stats, but 59%, so almost two-thirds of the CHRO surveyed, also believe we'll see an increased focus on employee well-being and a focus on mental health. And these are not mutually exclusive ideas, because the introduction of AI does have indirect and direct impacts on how people feel and show up at work. And so let's also bring into some suggestions for our leaders to encourage proper use, positive use. And so how can leaders encourage healthy use of AI tools without over-reliance, which inadvertently can lead to dependency or emotional over-attachment to these tools?
Yeah, again, I think there has to be a lot of reflexivity when using AI. It feels like a very fluid use when people first maybe adopt it, because it does have a conversational ability in the
Mm.
interaction, unlike a lot of the tools we use, or at least so far, because now everything's being integrated with AI. You'll be able to have that conversational ability with your Excel sheets if you want them. But that means then that there can be managerial blind spots, right? Managers can mistake engagement with AI for productivity, and that's a big mistake. So persistent solitude, emotional flattening, um, things where people become attached can be warning signs, not necessarily about a mental health crisis for an employee, but they're not efficiency gains
Mm.
necessarily. So I think how people decide to determine the effectiveness of AI use needs to be more rounded, and probably needs to be grounded in each company's culture and organization, what they hope to achieve. And so those productivity metrics that people try to attach to new AI use might even have to be changed team by team or context by context, right? Different goals. Productivity means different things. And that means, as a new tool, um, this is something that's going to need constant adjustment between leadership and their workers and listening to worker feedback. And that can help adjust the guidelines and the boundaries for how it's used. And again, I think ensuring that the primacy and the values are on the employee decision making, and that starts with the leadership modeling, messaging, company messaging, the education, everything has to be aligned so that people, managers, everybody understands that the value is on the human first.
Julie, you obviously do a lot of research on the evolving nature of AI and its impact on people's relationships and emotions. What are you seeing from a research perspective on what you're seeing and what other researchers are seeing in people's developing emotional attachments to AI, both from a personal, primarily from a personal sense, and obviously that impacts how people bring that into work.
So going back to my book, The Naked Android, where you mentioned, and it's very much about how even people's expectations of what a robot is and what a robot should be um, are very much rooted not in user research, but in what the designers, the developers, the decision makers behind the robot believe the intent, the capabilities,
Mm.
limitations, and what the work of the robot should be. So it's not necessarily user oriented. So that has to do with expectations. And what you're talking about, in a sense, are also expectations. How that affects robot design for designers and developers, for example, is they didn't necessarily have interactions with real world robots like a lot of us haven't had yet, but are about to in many contexts. And so they build robots often inspired by things like science fiction and what they've seen in movies, what they've read in books. Things like that are very inspirational and help push that innovation forward. But they're influential in the same way if you're using, in a similar way, if you're using an AI at home and you've developed a friendly or parasocial relationship, you developed a persona for it, that sort of thing, that informs your expectations about AI. And yes, you may initially approach even a friendly AI persona at work, whether it's one that's been created for you, like an agent, like a Jerry bot that helps everybody at work, or whether it's one you create yourself. You name the persona Jerry or whatever that helps you at work. But then you will find that the context is different. And this goes back to what I said earlier about humans are great at developing social relationships, social categories. And so, again, you'll negotiate that. Something in your brain clicks because you've learned to that there are different social categories and how you treat it. And you understand you're in a workplace. You also have the intellectual understanding somewhere in there that as a user, as somebody who works in the workplace, that there is an aspect of worker surveillance involved, which also changes how somebody interacts with the AI, or at least to a certain degree. Um, yeah, so short answer is it may transfer somebody's initial expectation of how to interact with something at work that actually may be to somebody's benefit in the workplace because they have an understanding of LLMs and chatbots and how to interact with them. But eventually, I believe that they will understand that it's a different social category, like
Yeah.
a coworker. Treat it differently than the one at home.
Yeah.
That's the hope. And part of that, again, is leadership and the organization itself setting the expectations for the workplace.
We've talked today a lot about AI, emotions, attachment, and in an evolving landscape where the answers of tomorrow will certainly be different and evolving and changing from the answers of today. But what is the one action leaders can take today to ensure that we can harness this great power and tool called AI and really protect our employees while supporting innovation and use it for all the good that it can do and then maintain that balance?
I'm going to harp on this, but I would say model healthy use from the top. Leadership uh, historically, even though this is a relatively new tool, comes in with an excitement about AI that they assume will immediately spread throughout an organization, about the use of integration of AI, when in fact employees often need reassurance, even if they are excited about the use of AI. And they need, again, this deep understanding, which I think is often blurry when AI is introduced, what the role of the AI is going to be and what its limitations as a tool are going to be. And this needs to be modeled, and that includes when people have all hands meetings and very excitedly talk about these new tools, say how they use them, even give a story and anecdote about when they overrided a decision and why, but why the tools can still be useful in helping push innovation forward. So a real measured way that's sort of, I'm going to say, a passive education for the members of the organization by modeling healthy use of AI at work, a
Awesome.
balanced use of AI at work.
And I know I asked for one, but I'm going to give a second one. Go read Dr. Julie's book, Dr. Carpenter's book, The Naked Android. So much to talk about on this topic, and we just touched the tip of the iceberg here. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts and your research on the impact of AI on things that are extremely top of mind for so many of our leaders.
Thank you.
That'll do it for this week's episode. If this conversation resonated with you, take a look at the show notes or resources on how to leverage AI responsibly while supporting your workforce. See you next time on Tomorrowist. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to Tomorrowist wherever you get your podcast. We also publish a weekly newsletter with in-depth articles and the latest SHRM research to help keep you in the know about the trends shaping the future of work. You can subscribe and find all of our episodes on our website at shrm.org/Tomorrowist. Thanks for listening. And remember, the workplace is changing rapidly. You don't have to be a futurist, be a Tomorrowist.
SHRM.